So we've got a really amazing day ahead of us, but I want to just kind of start it off by sharing, as Michael said, a little bit about what I see has sort of occurred in the last year and what the future may bring for us. When I initially sat down to write this speech, the Charles Dickens novel, A Tale of Two Cities, kept popping in my head. The first line is, "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times." And I think you would all agree that that kind of sums up how the LGBT community feels, particularly in North Carolina. We were really, on election night, so excited to see marriage equality win in Maine, Maryland, and Washington, and for Minnesota's own version of Amendment 1 to go down in defeat. But it was really a bittersweet night for us, because just 6 months earlier, our neighbors, co-workers, maybe even some of our friends and family voted to put Amendment 1 into the Constitution. And the party, on election night, the party that put Amendment 1 into the ballot in the first place solidified their control of the General Assembly and the governor's mansion. Let's face it, Amendment night was a real tough night for progressives and for LGBT in North Carolina. Republicans expanded the majority in the House and the Senate. What was a 68-52 majority in the House is now 77-43. And the Senate went from 31-19 to 32-18. And if you keep track of that sort of thing, that's a supermajority in both chambers. Former Charlotte Mayor Pat McCrory defeated Lieutenant Governor Walter Dalton to become the first Republican governor since the 1980s. And Democrats held on to several Council of State positions, but pro-equality Lieutenant Governor candidate Linda Coleman is locked in a very tough recount with anti-equality candidate Dan Forrest that won't be resolved for at least another week or two, if not longer. And possibly the most discouraging and damaging outcome for us that night was the loss of Judge Sam Ervin IV to Justice Paul Newby for the state Supreme Court. That confirmed a 4-3 lock that the conservatives have on the Supreme Court. And after last week, any consideration of Amendment 1 in the state court system looks even more daunting. So without a doubt, it was not a great night. So much so that for many of us, it was difficult to celebrate the victories for LGBT equality that we saw across the country. But those victories, I would argue, in the long run, will come to mean so much more for equality than the losses we've seen here at home. It is incredibly exciting that Washington and Maryland voters reaffirmed laws that were enacted by pro-equality legislatures just the year before. And in Maine, pro-equality citizens actually took the gutsy move to put the question of marriage equality to the voters. And they won. And in Minnesota, voters rejected a constitutional amendment that defined the marriage between a man and a woman, something we are all too familiar with here in North Carolina. It really was an incredible night. Not only have voters sided with fairness and equality for the first time in statewide questions, they did it 4 times. History was also made in Wisconsin. How does Senator Tammy Baldwin sound? I mean, wow, that's the only word that can adequately sum it up for me, just wow. The first openly gay United States Senator. And there will be at least 5 out members of the U.S. House of Representatives, including the first bisexual member who comes from Arizona and the first gay person of color who comes from California. And this is pretty awesome. New Hampshire is sending an openly trans woman to their state House of Representatives. And I can't finish a recap of LGBT victories without mentioning that America re-elected the most pro-gay president in our nation's history. So what went wrong in the old North State? Well, one word: redistricting. When the Republicans took over the legislature in 2010, they were given the right to redraw all of the state and congressional districts based on the 2010 census. And they drew them really, really well. If you need an example, consider this. More people actually voted in North Carolina for Democratic members of Congress, but we will be sending 4 out of 13 to the House of Representatives. For General Assembly races, many of the districts progressives thought were competitive turned out to be not as close as we had hoped. Unfortunately, that means we lost some of our strongest allies. Representative Jennifer Weiss, who spoke here last year, decided not to run because they had redrawn her district too conservatively. And Senator Doug Berger, he was targeted by the Republicans, who redrew his district, recruited Chad Barefoot, who is the son-in-law of Tammy Fitzgerald, and spent close to $1 million to defeat him. And we can't forget the incredible races that Susan Wilson and Deb Butler ran as out and proud lesbians. You'll hear from both of them later today, but Susan ran an amazing race for an open seat in Buncombe County, and Deb challenged an anti-equality incumbent in New Hanover. Unfortunately, both lost, but they certainly made us proud of the campaigns that they ran. But not is all gloom and doom in North Carolina. Out Representative Marcus Brandon from right here in Greensboro will be going back for another term. Yes. And several pro-equality legislators will be going as well, including Senator Josh Stein, Representatives Rick Glazier, and Deborah Ross. And we're also happy to see that ENC endorsed candidates for Attorney General, Secretary of State, Treasurer, and Superintendent of Public Schools all won their respective races. In fact, close to 60% of the 70 ENC endorsed candidates won their race. And I happen to know that that is a much better ratio than Karl Rove had on election day. I also think it's important for us to reflect on what we did accomplish this past year. Now, Amendment 1 was a grueling fight. In fact, it was a year ago that I stood here and talked to all of you to give you a preview of that campaign. And I said at the time that we were committed to doing everything we could to defeat Amendment 1. And it was amazing to see our community rally together. You were all incredible. The outcome was heartbreaking, but I am so proud of what we did accomplish during such difficult times. And I think you should be too. I do think, however, that there are some important lessons to take away from the campaign. First, we did lose by the second most narrow margin in a southern state. Now, a loss is still a loss. But the fact that we turned out over 800,000 people who stood with us is pretty amazing. We are not as alone as it sometimes feels. We need to find a way to tap into that sense of fairness and equality that a lot of our neighbors have and expand upon it. Second, I would argue that we have to scale back the potential harm of the amendment. Because we came out swinging right from the beginning about how harmful this amendment could be, our opponents were forced to respond and were off message from day one. They didn't get to run the princess ad, which they used so successfully in California to defeat Prop 8. They didn't have time to scare people into believing that by opposing this amendment, churches would all of a sudden be required to marry gay couples, or that the sky would fall. Instead, they had to spend time and dollars assuring the public that no children would come to harm and have their health insurance taken away from them, and that victims of domestic violence wouldn't be threatened by their abusers simply because they weren't married. Oh, and by the way, they really, really wanted us to know that they weren't anti-gay. They were just trying to defend the definition of marriage. And you know what? So far, no child has lost health insurance because of Amendment 1. And not only are the same cities and counties that were providing domestic partner benefits still doing so, the list is actually growing. Charlotte is going to start providing them on January 1. And victims of domestic violence aren't at risk here like they were in Ohio for 3 years after their amendment passed, because we raised that issue proactively, and judges have already rejected attempts to use Amendment 1 to protect perpetrators of domestic violence. Let me tell you a little bit more about what emerged from Amendment 1. 30 groups came together to defeat Amendment 1, including statewide, grassroots, progressive, and community organizations, from the North Carolina Conference of the NAACP to the Alliance of Baptists, from HRC and to Southerners on New Ground. More than 300 pro-equality North Carolina business owners signed a resolution opposing Amendment 1, and they urged the North Carolina legislature to support equality. More than 400 faith leaders signed a statewide resolution opposing Amendment 1 and pledged to put their faith into action. More than 160 student leaders recruited from over 100 campuses in North Carolina stood up to educate the public about the importance of fairness and equality, and over 200 pro-equality politicians, candidates, and local leaders were spurred on by the amendment fight to take a stronger stand for LGBT equality. It was an incredible effort, and one that we should all be proud of. Considering we had 6 months where Minnesota had 18, and we had $3 million, a little bit less, where Minnesota had 13 million, I think that we made tangible inroads in protecting our community here in North Carolina. But clearly, our work is not yet over. Now, many have asked about the next steps to address Amendment 1, and I want to talk to you about that today. There really are two options. One is to either try and repeal it, and the other is to try a legal challenge. Neither one is without challenges, and let me just spend a couple minutes talking about each. Repealing an amendment to the state constitution in North Carolina is the exact same process as putting one in the first place. So that means a repeal will require us to go to the House and get 3/5 of the majority there to support it, and then go to the Senate and get 3/5 of the majority there to support it, and then put it to a majority vote of the people. Can you imagine today going to either the House or the Senate and asking them that? No. So obviously, what we need to do is make some changes in the makeup of the House and the Senate. And the legal challenge isn't without risk either. We were watching the Supreme Court race very, very closely because of what it might mean for a challenge to Amendment 1. Ervin's loss makes a challenge that much more difficult. For a court case to be successful, it will take years and possibly hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, to work its way through the system. But that doesn't mean that we're going to be sitting around doing nothing. Next year is going to be tough, without a doubt. But I do see some rays of hope. If the Republicans are smart, and they want to have more than just a regional party in the South, they're going to have to start to moderate their tone. Consider what is happening on the national level. Regardless of what you thought of Romney and Obama on other issues, there had never been a clearer choice on LGBT issues. Obama supported marriage equality, Romney opposed it. Obama opposed Don't Ask, Don't Tell, Romney supported it. And Obama supports ENDA, and Romney opposed it. What I think, though, is even more remarkable is that none of those issues became the flashpoint that they would have just 4 years ago. And here's some more things to think about. For the first time, all major polls show that a majority of Americans support marriage equality. And they show that 70% of students, and in that respect, think future voters, support LGBT equality. And as I mentioned earlier, there are now more openly LGBT officials than ever before. This is also important. A national exit poll taken on November 6th showed that self-identified LGB voters, they did not ask trans-inclusive, they found that they made LGBT voters made up 5% of the electorate. And while that doesn't seem like a huge number, think about how many races, both nationally and locally, were decided by less than 5%. President Obama won 336 electoral college votes, but he actually only won about 50% of the popular vote. And several statewide races, including Linda Coleman's, in North Carolina were decided by less than a few percentage points. So what does all this mean? To me, this means that we are winning. Not only are people supporting full equality in greater numbers, it has become even less and less of an issue for so many people. So here's my message to you. It has never been more important for you to step up and be heard. It has never been more important for you to commit to never stop fighting for equality. We are at a tipping point in our nation's history, and you have an incredibly important role to play in achieving full equality here in North Carolina. Because of Amendment 1, we have created incredible partnerships statewide, and now we need to do the same thing on the local level, because I believe that is where we will find our most opportunities and greatest opportunities for equality. Right now, there are 12 cities and 4 counties that have some form of employment non-discrimination protection for their LGBT employees. We need your help to expand that. We plan to identify 2 to 3 localities each year and work on getting either some sort of employment non-discrimination, if it's not there already, or to expand it if it already is. And we need your help to make that a reality. You can help us by joining a coalition of organizations in your area to hold town halls, meet with local officials, to write letters to the editors, and to educate your neighbors about why equality helps all of us. In January, Equality NC Foundation is once again going to be crossing the state. We're going to be talking to all of you. We're going to come to your homes in places from Greenville to Fayetteville and Bakersville and everywhere in between to talk about why the elections matter and what you can do to help with equality. We also need to find fair-minded Republicans. Yes, I know that for some that sounds like an oxymoron. But let me put it this way. Right now, Republicans in the legislature need exactly 0 votes to pass anything they want. If we want to stop anything bad, we're going to have to find some Republicans to work with us. If we can't find them, we're going to need to recruit them. In fact, we must find fair-minded candidates of any party to run for office. And that's especially important if we ever want to consider repealing Amendment 1. So over the next 2 years, I want to find about half a dozen LGBT folks and our allies who are interested in public office, regardless of party. I know you're out there. In fact, some of you in this room may even fit that description. I want you to step up and be heard and to run for office. We also need to keep elected officials accountable. For months, politicians have been talking about jobs and the economy. Well, we need to point out to them that you can still be fired in North Carolina for being gay or trans. And if they want to start bringing the next generation of companies to North Carolina, they have to welcome the next generation of workers as well. We also have we also have a lot of them on tape saying, especially during the amendment fight, that they aren't anti-gay. Tammy Fitzgerald said that, sitting right next to me a few weeks ago on a television interview. Well, now's the time for them to step up and prove it. You can help us by keeping them accountable as we work to pass workplace non-discrimination in the state and local level. So to do that, I want you all to commit to attending town halls that the legislators hold and keep them accountable. I want you to try and record them. I want you to stand up and challenge their assumptions. Let them know that there are LGBT constituents and allies in their districts. And finally, the most important thing you can be doing, I want you to continue to share your stories. We know that when given the time and opportunity, once people get to know their LGBT friends and families, they come to love us. And straight allies, you have just as important a role to play in getting stories out there. Talk with pride about your LGBT friends and families, and challenge the preconceptions and the prejudices at every turn. And it's never been easier for you to share your stories. Equality NC has partnered with the ACLU on a project called Know and Love. Here's a flyer, and the ACLU's got a table out in the hall that I want you to check it out. It's never been easier. It's super easy to go and upload your stories through video and pictures. So visit knowandlove.org, and that's KNOW&ANDLOVE.org. And sign up to find some powerful tools to join the fight with images and words. During today's conference, you'll also have access to a lot of really great workshops, giving you the training and the tools to be better advocates. I want you to take advantage of that and take what you learn and share with those who couldn't be here. I really do feel like we're just getting started. After Amendment 1, Equality NC printed up thousands of bumper stickers with our unofficial slogan, "I'll never stop fighting for equality." I want you all to adopt that slogan as well. You need to keep fighting for equality. So gather your friends and get organized, share your stories, join the conversations, and stay in the fight. And together, let's show our opponents that by picking on us, they've woken a sleeping giant. And this giant is organized, is committed, and is royally pissed off.
That's right.
Thank you.